Welcome, everybody. Hello. I hope you're well today. Welcome to the Mental Health and Neuroscience Masterclass. My name is Dan Hermans. I'm the Professor of Youth Mental Health and Neurobiology at UniSC's Thompson Institute and also the Program Coordinator for the Mental Health and Neuroscience programs. And in this webinar today, I'm being joined by my colleagues, Dr. Chrissy Driver and Dr. Sophie Andrews, who will be presenting to you. And both Chrissy and Sophie are course coordinators of the Mental Health and Neuroscience postgraduate program at UniSC's Thompson Institute. Next slide, please. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge country. And so on behalf of my colleagues at UniSC and the Thompson Institute, we pay our respects to the traditional custodians of the lands on which we work and meet today. And I pay my respects in particular to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Next slide, please. So just very quickly, an overview of a summary of the webinar today. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the Thompson Institute, and then I'll be handing over to Dr. Chrissy Driver, as I mentioned before, course coordinator of the Mental Health and Neuroscience programs. And Chrissy's going to give you an overview of the programs, all three of them, tell you about their content and some questions about admissions, requirements, how to apply, and some student stories. And then after that, we're going to hear from Sophie Andrews, who's going to present a masterclass. And Sophie is a researcher who's actively researching healthy brain aging. And so you're going to hear a lot more about Sophie's work and other work in that area. But before we begin, I just need to say a few things, some housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded, and we will be sending copies out to everyone who registered. So thanks again for being here and for registering and showing your interest in our programs. Very popular webinar today. We have over 1,000 registrations, so thank you all. We do hope at the very end to have a Q&A session. So hopefully we'll have around 10 minutes. Happy to go over time if needed, where we can address some of your questions. So I do urge you during the presentations during the webinar to post your questions in the Q&A or chat feature of Zoom. Next slide, please, Sophie. So just very quickly, those of you who may not know about the Thompson Institute and the National PTSD Research Centre, more on the latter in a moment. But the Thompson Institute has been going for around 9 years now, based in the Sunshine Coast and part of the University of the Sunshine Coast. And very quickly, we're a research centre dedicated to mental health and neuroscience, and we address these themes in four major ways. We have clinical work, we have advocacy, and of course, research and education. So we have a whole range of clinics. You can see some of them listed there, from psychology to a very new PTSD clinic, healthy brain aging, which you'll hear more about in this webinar, to a whole range of novel interventions. We're very strong and keen in developing our advocacy. So we have a lot of public events and community outreach and partnerships and lived experience programs. And in terms of research, we cover some of Australia's and certainly globally some of the most pressing issues in mental health, from youth mental health to trauma and stress-related conditions to suicide prevention, and of course, healthy brain aging. And running across those research programs, we have platforms, in particular, neuroimaging, data analytics, and molecular biology, just to name a few. And of course, you're here tonight to hear more about one of our education aspects, the mental health and neuroscience postgraduate programs. But of course, we also have high degree research students, PhDs and masters, and other types of training, including community training. Next slide, please. And very recently, I mentioned this earlier, we've opened the National PTSD Research Centre. It's part of the Institute, and also happy to announce that we have a new director, Professor Alain Brunet, who's joined us from Montreal, Canada, and now based on the Sunshine Coast, and really leading this, well, the whole institute, but in particular our PTSD research and the centre there. So I do urge you to look at the web pages and to look more into what we're doing there, and certainly a very exciting time and phase for the Thompson Institute. And as you can see, we're developing our profile when a national profile in regard to trauma and stress-related disorders through this research centre. Next
The
slide,
information
please.
that I've learned through this course
Oh,
has been applied into my job many
just go
times.
back a step. I'd just like to now hand over to Chrissy, and Chrissy's going to give you an overview of the programs. And I think we're going to start with a testimonial from some of our students. Over to Chrissy.
Yep, all good, Sophie. If you want to pop that video on now, that'd be great.
The information that I've learned through this course has been applied into my job many times when it comes to the vulnerable populations, those at risk of mental health and suicide. By studying online, I can still get a postgraduate education while working the job that I love.
As an educator, we certainly are tasked with delivering the curriculum, but we're also tasked with ensuring that the young people are safe and supported.
I'm an advanced care paramedic with the Queensland Ambulance Service, and I work as a rural reliever across a lot of regions in Darling Downs. I chose to study neuroscience and mental health at USC because they offered an in-depth background into the neurobiology of mental health to better understand why mental health develops and how to better treat the symptoms and conditions that patients have.
I've obviously got a real vested interest in mental health and neuroscience, having done my background in psychology and then continuing to work with young people each and every day. So I've been able to engage with a lot of the learnings in my current context as a secondary school educator, particularly around mental health and mental illness in adolescence. Well, I work full-time at the moment, so obviously online study was my preferred option. In my classroom teacher role, I teach senior psychology, so I've found that being able to engage with the content in this program has enhanced my practice as a classroom teacher and certainly warrants a lot of interest from my students.
So what I really like about being involved in this program is, first of all, it's one of a kind in Australia. It's the only fully online mental health and neuroscience course. The other aspect I really enjoy is actually getting to see the students, even though it's in an online setting, getting to chat to them and hear about how they're already applying their knowledge in their professions and in their practice.
Studying online means that I don't have to go into uni. I can study from home in my own environment, on my own downtime. Each week we get to have Zoom classes and ask real-time questions and get answers from experts in the field.
The great thing about what the students get to experience in terms of the teaching staff is that we have such a wide range of contributors to the content. So the students get to hear from a variety of experts at the Thompson Institute who are all at the forefront and cutting edge of their research areas. So we have a very multidisciplinary cohort, paramedics, nurses, counsellors, social workers. Everybody's recognising that this is a really important aspect of their work.
As educators, we know that the young people in our care are faced with unprecedented amount of challenges, and having the knowledge and developing this literacy around mental health and neuroscience is invaluable for us educators because it helps us to ensure that the students in our care are well supported.
Studying mental health has been really important for me because as a paramedic, I can deliver that frontline care to those in crisis, to be able to help those people who are often misunderstood or stigmatised, to break that barrier and deliver the best possible care that I can.
Okay, next slide.
The information that I've learned.
Great. So as you can see from that video and from the slide we have up at the moment, we have students from a huge range of backgrounds in this course, and the diversity of the students really reflects how increasingly relevant mental health is across a range of careers. In a recent UniSC news story, one of our current students, Beck, who you can see here on the slide, who's a PR manager, told us that it's really inspiring to see people from different walks of life coming together to learn how they can better contribute to the world and our communities. Now, other students tell us that having this understanding about mental health and the neuroscience behind it has really helped them accelerate their careers, has given them a unique edge in their current career, or has equipped them to take a slightly different career path. And obviously, due to the online nature of this course, we actually have students from all over Australia and even some living overseas. Next slide. So firstly, I'm going to give you an overview of the 3 different programs and what they offer, and all of which are asynchronous and fully online. So first, we have the graduate certificate, which is 4 courses. We have the graduate diploma, which is 8, and then the Masters of Mental Health and Neuroscience, which is a little bit different, and I'll explain that later. So if you're interested in any of these courses, you might be wondering which one is actually best suited to you. So I'm going to explain the differences and what some of our current students have been doing, or previous students have been doing with their qualifications, which is something that we get asked a lot. Next slide, please. So in the graduate certificate, you'll come away with a comprehensive understanding of the rapidly evolving field of mental health, with a focus on the latest neuroscience research and treatment options. So we introduce you to the main disorders across the lifespan, ranging from trauma, neurodiversity, mood disorders, eating disorders, substance abuse, PTSD, and all the way through to dementia. And then we also critique the current and also novel treatment approaches. So next we delve into youth mental health and the neurobiological underpinnings. Now we unpack some of the most pressing issues for youth, such as suicidality, cyberbullying, and social connectedness, and how the brain is affected by all of these experiences. Then we introduce you to how neuroimaging techniques such as MRI and EEG have enhanced our understanding of mental health diagnosis and treatment. And we also explore some of the emerging brain-based biomarkers. Finally, as suicide is a major public health concern, this course focuses on prevention at all levels of society, looking at things like lived experience and deepening our understanding of the really unique factors of certain priority populations. Now, the grad cert is available part-time and is a good place to start if you're wanting to test the MHN waters a little bit, or if you want a shorter qualification that still gives you the mental health and neuroscience fundamentals. Next slide. So here's what some of our students who have completed our graduate certificate have said about the course. So this has come from Ian, who's a workplace health and safety manager. He said, the graduate certificate has been of enormous benefit to me. I've applied relevant aspects positively in advocating for better inclusion and neurodiversity in the workplace, prevention of psychological harm, intervention with FIFO workers, and interventions with FIFO workers struggling with their mental health. He said he had such a positive yet challenging study experience in completing the graduate certificate, but he has no hesitation in recommending MHN to anyone who has a passion for learning in this field. He said, you will not be disappointed and it will change your thinking and enhance your knowledge forever. Next slide. So in terms of eligibility for the graduate certificate, because they all have slightly different eligibility criteria. So for the graduate certificate, you need a bachelor degree in any discipline, or a completed recognised AQF diploma level qualification and 3 years full-time relevant work experience in a mental health setting. Next slide. So moving on to the graduate diploma, which is a step up from the graduate certificate. It has 8 courses, which includes the 4 courses we've discussed from the grad cert, but another 4 courses where we take a deeper dive into more specific areas of mental health and neuroscience research. So in our Healthy Brain Aging course, this will give you a deep understanding of the neuroscience underlying the spectrum from healthy brain aging, mild cognitive impairment, and right through to the risk factors, neurobiology, and current and emerging treatment approaches to disease brain aging, such as dementia. Now, you're going to hear a little bit more about this from Sophie later on, so you get a sneak peek of what is in our course. Our neurocognition course focuses on how specific cognitive domains are affected across different disorders. And then we learn the neurobiological mechanisms behind current and emerging treatment approaches for neurocognitive impairments. So our stress-related disorders course unpacks the neurobiology of stress and trauma and investigates the evidence for current and novel treatment approaches for debilitating disorders such as PTSD. Finally, we have a course devoted to how lifestyle factors are changing the landscape in terms of prevention and treatment in mental health. And as always, we delve into the neurobiological mechanisms of different lifestyle factors and the environment. And we also look at the benefits of multi-domain approaches. So as you can see, the graduate diploma does take you to the next level in terms of the depth of knowledge relating to those specific issues and topics in mental health and neuroscience, and gives you plenty of opportunity to apply the knowledge that you're learning in your current professions via the innovatively designed assessments. So next slide, please. In the video, you saw Josh and Emily, who I'm pleased to say have both graduated from the graduate diploma. So now we're going to hear from a couple of other students who've also completed the graduate diploma and what their qualification has done for them. So we've got Katie completed the course as a means of bridging her undergraduate studies in psychology to a master's in occupational therapy. And she's now actually completing a PhD. So here's what she had to say. She said, learning alongside students from varied backgrounds fostered discussion and critical thinking that furthered my understanding of the multidisciplinary applications of this research. The coursework encouraged us to research topics that were relevant to our disciplines and interests, while simultaneously challenging us to widen our scope and understanding of what neuroscience actually encompasses. She said the course has permanently changed how she views mental health and believes that the insights gained will continue to influence her practice for many years to come. An interesting point to note that during this course, Katie developed a keen interest in healthy brain aging, which was unexpected to her. And because of this experience, she's now been offered a PhD in dementia research, and she's currently doing that. She said she's filled with gratitude and appreciation for the knowledge and skills gained throughout her studies, and she's super keen to share this with others to help them understand the benefits of the program. Cassia recently graduated from the graduate diploma. She's a psych grad and behaviour specialist, and said that since completing the graduate diploma, she was fortunate enough to be offered a position as a child and family wellbeing practitioner within a month of completing the course. So in this role, she said she provides support and holistic services to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children and their families. Her work focuses on capturing all health and wellbeing needs by building on the strengths of families and communities, while emphasising the 4 key principles of physical, mental, spiritual and family health. She said that her MHM studies have greatly enhanced her understanding of child development, mental health issues and effective intervention strategies. And she said the skills she acquired during the program have been invaluable in refining her therapeutic approaches and improving the quality of the care she provides. Some great testimonies there. So for many of our students, the grad dip is about becoming more specialised in their current practice or profession, and having that more in-depth mental health and neuroscience knowledge. On the other hand, some students are following their passions, changing their careers completely, or going on a personal learning journey. We've also had several students complete the graduate diploma as a stepping stone to medicine. Other grad dip students are using this qualification to enhance their CVs, to apply for more senior positions, advancing their current career prospects, or actually moving into more mental health and wellbeing based roles within their organisations. Now, with so many organisations now valuing health and wellbeing, having employees with this extended knowledge is preparing organisations for the future in terms of having those diverse skills within their workforce. So in terms of eligibility criteria, for the graduate diploma, which is slightly different to the grad cert, you need an undergraduate degree in a relevant discipline. Now, examples of relevant disciplines include science, medical science, nursing, medicine, psychology, health science, pharmacy, counselling, occupational therapy, paramedicine, speech pathology, social work. There's lots that I could name, but this list is not exhaustive. So if you're not sure, you can always check with student services. Now, if you don't have a relevant undergrad, then perhaps the graduate certificate might be a good place to start. And then potentially you can move on to the grad dip afterwards. That's the great part about our courses, is they're all nested. So if you complete the grad cert and you want to keep going, you can then apply further and complete the graduate diploma. Next slide, please. So now to the masters. This has all the courses we've just discussed, but finishes with a research project. So our students complete a research principles course, which teaches them about the variety of research areas in mental health and neuroscience. And then they do a supervised component, which involves a literature review on a given topic, and an empirical thesis component, which represents an original contribution to the literature. So our students in the master's program do undertake data analysis based on existing data sets, and they may be part of a larger program of research and may build on previous work that's been carried out to date at the Thompson Institute. So if you know that research is what you want to do and you meet the eligibility criteria, then you can apply directly into the master's. But if you just want the mental health and neuroscience content knowledge and you're not so fussed about the research part, then the graduate diploma or graduate certificate would probably be better. If you're not sure about research, you can always start in the graduate certificate or graduate diploma and potentially apply for the master's on completion of the graduate diploma. However, just a point to note, so to ensure the availability of high quality research projects, places are very limited in the master program, and this quota will vary each semester. So for semester 1, 2025, which starts in a couple of weeks, applications for the masters have closed, but you can still apply for the graduate diploma or the graduate certificate now to get you started in semester 1. Also, if you don't quite have the right criteria to meet the masters, we may be able to offer you the graduate certificate or the graduate diploma instead. Next slide, please. So in terms of eligibility for the masters, we do ask for a relevant degree, but we also ask for a personal statement where we want to hear about your motivation to choose the Master in Mental Health and Neuroscience program and understand how your previous studies and experience align with the degree and the research avenues. So yeah, have a think about what program or pathway might be suitable for you. Okay, next slide. So we do know that postgraduate study is expensive, but I do have some great news for those of you who are keen on the content knowledge gained through the grad cert or the grad dip and you want to apply now. These two courses do have Commonwealth supported places, which means they're being offered at a significantly reduced price. The Masters is not currently under this scheme, so it is therefore full price. So this is also something else to consider when you're deciding which program to apply for. But currently, as you can see, the graduate certificate and graduate diploma are still open for semester 1 applications and do have Commonwealth supported places. Next slide. So I'm quickly going to go over some common questions that we get from prospective students and give you some advice that our current and previous students have given us to pass on to you. So people always ask us, how much time do I need to study each week for an online course? Now, we do sit within UniSC's usual semester dates, so we offer up to 13 weeks worth of content. But because this is fully online, you can choose when you do your study and also how you approach the content. So if you like structure, you can follow along week by week, guided by the course coordinator. If you're more autonomous, there's actually no obligation to engage weekly. The entire course materials are available at the start of the semester, so you can strategize how you want to complete the assessments straight away. The only thing you must do is submit the assessments before the due date, which are spread throughout the semester. Now, with this in mind, in terms of time, the university recommends that 10 to 12 hours per week per course is a rough guide in terms of how long you should be spending studying. Now, our modules are designed to take a couple of hours to complete. And then if you engage in the optional post-module activities that we provide, then this will obviously take longer. And then any additional time on top of that is your self-study and working on your assessments. So what we have found is that most of our students do work part-time and some full-time. So many work full-time, and so many have chosen to study part-time, Now, part-time can be 1 to 2 courses per semester, and the feedback from our student tends to be that this is a better way to pace the learning and allows you to focus on the content in a bit more depth. But we do also have students who do manage the full-time load, so it's really up to you to think about how much time you can allocate to study over the period of the semester. So from a student perspective, we are going to hear from Lisa and Riven, who both completed the graduate certificate part-time. So Lisa said, I run my own full-time business and it's been extremely busy. However, I would just make sure that I compartmentalized. So I would block out time in my diary each week where I would only focus on my studies. Riven said that she also worked full-time throughout this course and she found it to be manageable doing the 2 courses per semester. She does say that she recommends using a calendar or a planner to help with your time management. Next slide. So a lot of people ask us what it's like to engage in online study, because online study is different. And if you haven't done it before, it may take a while to adjust. So there are no specific lectures or tutorials to attend. There's more of an onus on the student to be proactive and manage your time. So our content, which would, I guess, normally be delivered in your traditional 2-hour lecture setting, for example, is actually packaged up in a beautiful interactive module. Now, you'll actually get an example of what a module looks like after this webinar when we send you a taster module. So with our online platform, you can also structure this in a way that suits your work and life commitments, and the modules themselves can actually also be easily viewed on your smartphone. So With that in mind, there's also lots of opportunity for discussion with your peers and questions about the content via several platforms. We've got discussion boards, optional Zoom drop-ins, and there are lots of extra activities that are optional that are designed to help you consolidate your learning and start preparing for your assessments. So as I said, these types of optional extra activities are the ones that I guess you would normally do in your in-class or face-to-face tutorial or workshop. So see those activities as your tutorial activities. But in the online setting, you can do all of this or none of this. It's really up to you how much you engage in those extra activities. So in terms of some feedback, that's Riven there. So she said she found the course to be really informative, engaging and empowering. I loved how it was as autonomous or as collaborative as you wanted it to be. The online format was much easier to navigate than I anticipated, and every single thing had been thought of, and in the rare case there was an issue, staff were receptive and responsive to make improvements. Okay, next slide. So we also get asked how much neuroscience is there in the course? Now the answer is lots. Neuroscience is a rapidly growing field and is becoming somewhat popular thanks to some high-profile podcasters. So it is a very exciting time to be learning about the brain. But we don't expect students to come away knowing everything about the brain, but we do delve into the neurobiology of the disorders, imaging modalities, and more. So whilst there are some courses that are a bit more neuro-focused, for example, the imaging course, and some with a lot less neuro content, it is definitely a blend of both mental health and neuroscience. But that's what makes this course one of a kind in Australia. So these courses are not mental health with a little sprinkling of neuroscience. They're very much a balanced blend. So some students do find it tricky to begin with, as neuroscience is like a whole new language, but it does become more manageable as you progress through the courses, and you'll notice some themes that come up across the content. It is important to note, though, that with the wonderful world of the internet, we have lots of mental health and neuroscience content at your fingertips, and doing a quick Google search can give you a fairly good overview of some of the recent trends and topics. However, in these programs, we do challenge you to go a little bit deeper than that. Our assessments are focused on interpretation of the recent research, critical evaluation and synthesis of the evidence base. So we are definitely encouraging the skills of science communication, but also, to quote Professor Dan Hermans, to be a healthy skeptic. So that is to get deep into the literature, consider all sides of the evidence and evaluate the findings in the context of your own professional or personal context. So we do have various different assessment styles to challenge these skills, test your knowledge, and allow you opportunity to demonstrate your science communication across many contexts and for varied audiences. So some more feedback from our lovely students, and this is Katie here in the picture. So the teaching staff do a great job of breaking down incredibly complex topics so that they're easy to understand. I've loved learning about the new advances in technology from the last 10 years, which means the information we're studying is really current. Developing an understanding of the different cutting-edge brain imaging techniques has been fascinating, and I was amazed to discover the course covers such a broad range of topics. Next slide. So finally, it is important to point out that in terms of support for our online students, you actually get access to all the same support services as our on-campus students, so you do not miss out. You get academic support, student wellbeing, accessibility services, and much more. Plus, you get support from your awesome course coordinators in a variety of ways, including discussion boards, Zoom drop-ins, regular check-ins with study tips and hints, and this is all throughout the semester. So our students wanted to share the following. So in addition to the ability to engage with the content independently, I was also afforded high levels of support, evident in the ability to access supplementary resources to solidify my understanding of any complex content, and throughout the many drop-in sessions which were offered to discuss content and assignments. I felt well supported throughout the duration of this course and cannot believe how much I've learned. And the Zoom meetings are a great mechanism to check in with the course coordinators and ask questions. They were also useful to see other students and understand different points of view on assignment topics and listen to how their questions were answered by the academics. So I just want to finish off by letting you know how to apply. So if you go to our website and have a look at the information on the graduate diploma and graduate certificate websites, there is a button that says apply. So if you want to apply, that's the easiest way to get there, is just to apply directly online. Semester 1 applications are still open. Semester 1 starts on the 24th of Feb, so get in quick if you are keen to start this semester. Otherwise, you can also start in semester 2. That's no problems at all. Just make sure you check the eligibility criteria, include all the necessary information in your application, as this will make the process much easier. And if you're not sure, you can always speak to Student Services for advice. So thank you for listening. I know that was long, but I'm now going to pass over to Dr. Sophie Andrews, who's going to take you through an amazing masterclass about healthy brain aging.
Thank you very much, Chrissy, and I'm very glad to be joining you all this evening. So we're going to be talking about healthy brain aging, both about what you expect with the normal brain changes during aging from a neuroscience perspective, how that differs from dementia, and then also some of the exciting developments around prevention and risk reduction of dementia and maintaining brain health in aging. So just briefly, a little bit about me. I am, as Chrissy mentioned, a senior lecturer in the mental health and neuroscience course. I'm also a registered clinical neuropsychologist. And I've been working in the area of healthy brain aging and dementia for about a decade. So I'm really excited to dive in. So in general, I think we can all agree that most people hope to live happy and healthy lives into old age. And we certainly live longer than ever before. So this graph just shows how our life expectancies have changed over the past 100 years, and that we've really gained about 20 years of life in terms of life expectancy. But with those added years of life expectancy, the next question is, how healthy and functional are those extra years? And unfortunately, in many of those additional years that have been gained, especially in the last couple of decades, have actually been, in general, years lived with disability. And so what we're really interested in the field of healthy brain aging is how to really optimize those older years so that we look after our brain and can really have that optimal longevity throughout our lifespan, right up until close to our final years. And when it comes to diseases of aging, one of the most common issues in Australia and all around the world is dementia. So dementia is not a disease itself, but rather it's an umbrella term for a condition that results in progressive cognitive decline as well as functional decline. So there are many potential causes of dementia. The most common is Alzheimer's disease, but there are plenty of others, such as other kinds of direct dementia, like vascular dementia and Lewy body disease, but also movement disorders like Parkinson's disease and Huntington's disease, as well as repeated traumatic brain injuries, just to name a few potential causes. There are over 400,000 people in Australia that currently live with dementia, and it is set to be the #1 cause of death in Australia next year, overtaking heart disease for the first time. So it is a major issue. Before we go into how the brain ages and how this differs from dementia, I'll give you a short overview of some basic brain science. So this is a view of the brain from the outside, and the brain is divided broadly into different regions, as can be seen here. This outer part of the brain with all the ridges and valleys is called the cerebral cortex. The frontal lobe, that is labelled in the front there in the pink area, is important for what we call executive functioning, including paying attention, planning, and organising thoughts and actions. The temporal lobe in the orange area is particularly important for learning, memory, and language. The parietal lobe, which is that pink area towards the back, is important for sensory and visual motor integration. And the occipital lobe at the back is important for processing vision. Those precentral and postcentral gyrus are also important for sensory and motor control, so movements. If we move on to the inside of the brain, and we're looking down the center of the brain, you can see that there are a number of structures deep in the brain, which are crucial for connecting different regions of the brain, as well as some of the more automatic or basic functions like breathing, hunger, sleep, and sending basic automatic messages from our peripheral nervous system. So that's our other parts of our body. If we look at the corpus callosum, so that's that white band that runs through the middle of the brain there. That's like a superhighway of the brain connecting the two hemispheres. So that's the left and right sides of the brain. So what is a lot of this brain matter made of? So neurons are brain cells, and there are 86 billion in the human brain, and they're constantly communicating with each other. The cell bodies are what make up the grey matter of the brain, and the axons, which are covered with a white sheath that are running down that image there, are covered, they make up the white matter tracts of the brain. So when we talk about grey matter and white matter, it's actually these cells, the different parts of the neurons all bundled together, which is appearing these different substances in the brain. So let's see how neurons communicate with each other in this short video.
Neurons communicate with each other, relaying messages throughout your body and powering all of your thoughts and actions. Neurons talk to each other using both electrical and chemical signals. Messages start as electrical signals traveling rapidly down a neuron. These signals are called action potentials. When they reach the gap between two neurons, the messages need some help to get across. The information is transformed from an action potential into a chemical message, which crosses the gap called a synapse. The release of those chemical messengers can trigger an action potential in the neuron on the other side of the synapse, conveying the message onward. Or it can quiet the message. This happens over and over and over. And with repeated activity, the synapse gets stronger, so the next message is more likely to get through. That way, neurons learn to pass on important messages and ignore the rest. This is how our brains learn and adapt to an ever-changing world.
So now that we know a little bit of the basics of brain biology, what changes during aging? Well, as neurons age, like all parts of our physiology, some functional aspects begin to decline. So some examples of this are we can have mitochondrial dysfunction, so that's how the brain gets energy. We can have intracellular accumulation of what we call oxidatively damaged proteins. So the proteins in the brain start to be damaged, and I'll explain a bit more about how that's implicated in dementia shortly. We get compromised DNA repair, so our DNA does not repair as easily. Dysregulated neuronal homeostasis, so that's how the brain either has more excitation or is quietened down. That can become a little bit abnormal. And we also have inflammation, and inflammation in the brain works somewhat similarly to inflammation in the body. So all of these changes happen, but importantly, the actual daily function of an individual person who is a healthy older adult is not usually affected. So what is affected from aging? Well, there are some cognitive functions that are affected and some others that aren't. So, for example, some that are not affected and may even improve are language and communication abilities, general knowledge and long-term memory, and that can actually improve, as well as visuospatial abilities. But in contrast, a few areas that do change during aging is speed of processing shows some slowing, and that's to do with those white matter tracts that I mentioned earlier becoming a little bit less efficient, and so that can slow down the speed of thinking across the brain. Working memory, so how we hold information in our mind when we need to do something kind of on the go. as well as executive functioning. So these are things like planning, multitasking. It's not that they can't be done, they can just, and this ties in a little bit to the speed of processing as well, can just take a little bit longer or need to kind of just take that time to think things through. But as I said, that does not affect everyday function. So how is that different from dementia? Well, the exact pathology of what occurs in dementia depends on the type of dementia. But this figure that you can see on the screen here shows some of the changes that occur in Alzheimer's disease. So amyloid is a type of protein that is important for normal brain function. But in Alzheimer's disease, this protein transforms into a faulty, harmful type of protein called amyloid beta. Now, amyloid beta, we do have a small amount of this accumulate in any one brain of any age, and particularly in older age, you get a little bit more of this. But in Alzheimer's disease, you get too much, excessive amounts of this that then clump together and they form what we call plaques, which damage the neurons, the brain cells. Additionally, we have another protein called tau, which is important for transporting nutrients within cells. But in Alzheimer's disease, the tau detaches from these microtubules, which is where it's supposed to be, and actually sticks together to form neurofibrillary tangles inside the neuron cell body. So together, the amyloid beta and the tau impair the function of the neuron and eventually cause the cell death. In addition, the supporting cells in the brain called astrocytes and microglial cells are also damaged. These altogether results in brain atrophy, which is where the brain cells die and erode. So you result in this brain shrinkage or lower brain volume. So if we look at what this looks like on an MRI brain scan, you can see on one side we have a healthy adult and what their brain looks like, and you can see how full it is with only small gaps. And then if you see someone who has Alzheimer's disease, you can see that there are much more gaps. And this is where the neurons have died and that the brain has actually shrunk. And in particular, if we see down on the lower parts on the edges there, those particular places, those are actually the temporal lobes, and they're really important for language and memory. And you can see that those are particularly affected in Alzheimer's disease. And this matches what we find in terms of the cognitive profile. So in terms of symptoms of dementia, and in this case, I'm specifically talking about Alzheimer's disease, the cognitive symptoms differ quite significantly from healthy aging. So you get impairments in new learning and memory deficits, so that people have impairments to their short-term memory and learning new information and encoding that into long-term memory, because that is driven by the temporal lobes. Visuospatial difficulties are common, so getting lost in familiar places or losing ability to kind of manipulate things in the environment. You can have language dysfunction is common, so difficulty naming common objects or finding words. And this goes above and beyond the general kind of difficulty we all have from time to time with word finding difficulties, but this is something that is really impairing communication skills. We can also see executive dysfunction, so particularly around awareness and insight of somebody's awareness of their own, kind of being able to reflect on their own impairments, as well as some difficulties with kind of multitasking or juggling multi-stage different activities that we might want to do. So things like cooking can become quite challenging. It differs a lot from person to person, but you can see some behavioural changes, and these can be anything from seeming to change personality and becoming less empathetic, perhaps a little bit more socially inappropriate, can be a bit more impulsive, and then also be more depressed or have apathy. So a lack of motivation is also quite common. And this is as the disease is more progressed as well. You tend to see this when dementia becomes more severe. And as I said, in order for it to be dementia, you have to have functional difficulties as well in everyday life. So So over the past decade, research has established that multiple environmental, lifestyle, and health factors can influence brain health and make the brain either more or less susceptible to the effects of dementia pathology. So, for example, prenatal environments, alcohol intake, and smoking, as well as air pollution, can cause neurotoxicity. Depression and job strain and social isolation can cause psychosocial stress. Poor diet and head trauma can cause inflammation, while diabetes, obesity, and hypertension can cause cardiometabolic burden. So all of these are thought to accelerate normal brain aging, so via some of those mechanisms that I mentioned earlier, and that just puts more pressure on the brain and accelerates the dementia process once it starts. So it's kind of like the brain is less resilient because of all these other factors. So how can we harness this knowledge of these mechanisms to support dementia prevention? So this figure actually comes from the latest Lancet Commission report on dementia, which was published just last year. And this is a major report that looks at all the epidemiological evidence. So that's evidence from big population studies, identifying what the individual risk factors are that are really important for dementia. And this latest report estimates that 45% of population attributable risk, so this is overall risk of dementia across the population, could be prevented via these modifiable risk factors. So reducing these risk factors, and you can see the list there includes everything from hearing loss to traumatic brain injury, physical inactivity, diabetes, obesity, social isolation is very important. By reducing these risk factors, you can enhance brain resilience. And this is thought to be through some of these biological processes. So reduced inflammation in the brain, boosting neuroplasticity and regeneration. So for example, physical activity is known to release neurochemicals in the brain that are very important for neuroplasticity. Helps to promote healthy vasculature in the brain, so reduce risks of mini strokes or ischemic disease, which deprives oxygen in the brain, and the brain uses a lot of oxygen, so that can have a really negative effect. Improved brain metabolism and improved clearance of neurotoxins, and some of those neurotoxins that I mentioned on the previous slide. And that's just to name a few. There are many new mechanisms that we are refining and discovering all the time to make better sense of this whole area of preventative neuroscience. So I'm going to talk just briefly about a little bit of the research that we've done in the Healthy Brain Aging Clinic over the past couple of years, which have really helped link dementia risk with some of these actual neurobiological measures. So as I mentioned on the previous slide, those dementia risk lifestyle factors have really been determined through epidemiological research. So those are these big population studies that look at risk factors and then who gets dementia and who doesn't. But it's not completely understood how somebody's dementia risk that can't be calculated as a score through all of these risk factors actually relates to their neurobiology. So what we did was we looked at people's grey matter volumes and also their white matter volumes. So those were the size of their brain when it comes to grey matter and white matter, and we corrected for their age, the size of their skull, their gender, and their education level. And so then we looked at that and related it to a dementia risk score that really focused in on just those modifiable risk factors that I mentioned earlier. And what we found was that for the white matter volume, which are the dots that are shown in blue and that blue line, we found a significant relationship between the white matter tracts, the size of the white matter tracts, and that dementia risk. And not only that, but we also found in these same participants that a lower dementia risk score based on modifiable risk factors was also related to a measure of brain function measured using EEG, which indicated that the brain was more efficient. So we call this the aperiodic component, or we also call it neural noise. And basically, as older people get older, their brains become more noisy, for want of a better term, which just indicates perhaps less efficient processing. And what we found was that they had less neural noise. The people in the study who had lower dementia risk scores had less neural noise. So these are findings that suggest that there is a direct link between dementia risk scores and neurobiology, and this is years before these people would be having potentially been diagnosed with dementia. This is a healthy older sample. So just to lead on from that, over the past decade, efforts have been focused on interventions of health and lifestyle factors to reduce risk of dementia. And so the first successful case of this was the FINGER trial, which was run in over 1,200 participants in Finland. And this study showed it had an intervention that was focused on improving participants' diet, their physical exercise, their vascular and metabolic monitoring, so looking after cardiovascular risk factors, helping boost their social activity, and also undergoing some cognitive training, so some brain training. And they followed them up after 2 years and found that not only did they increase their cognitive abilities when they were compared to a control group, but they also reduced their cases of chronic disease, which put them at higher risk of dementia. So this was really encouraging. And since then, in the last decade, there have been many multi-domain dementia risk reduction trials that have been underway all around the world, including Australia. And at the Thompson Institute, we actually have our own trial. And the different trials are really looking at different combinations of modifiable dementia risk factors with different types of interventions to see perhaps what is most effective and what different effects we can get. So in our trial, we have target 4 lifestyle factors. So physical activity, diet, so Mediterranean diet, sleep, and mindfulness. And then we have a 12-week intervention with and compared to a control group, and follow them up after 6 months and 2 years as well. And we're still looking at the outcome measures at this stage, but so far we found that, just as one example, participants after a 6-month follow-up actually found increases to 2 really important neurochemicals for neuroplasticity. Compared to control group, they showed increases in brain-derived neurotrophic factor and irisin. And as I said, these are both really important for neuroplasticity in the brain and good brain health. So we're already getting some exciting results, but we have MRI, EEG, and as well as cognitive measures all in the process of analysis. So we'll hopefully maybe next year I'll be able to share for the full results of this study. So just to finish up, I just thought I would touch on where the future of healthy brain aging might be leading. It's a really exciting time for healthy brain aging and dementia risk reduction. I think we're going to move towards more of a personalized lifestyle medicine approach. So really trying to match the right intervention for the right person. And this might be based on some biological factors, their medical history, genetics. So we've got some really exciting research that's looking at genetics that, for example, might dictate how well you respond to one intervention or another, as well as people's preferences and personality as to what type of intervention would really work for an individual. And so what we're aiming is that this kind of combination can all come together to have an optimized healthy brain aging for all different individuals. And so thanks for your attention. I hope that gave you a little bit of an overview of this field and some of the content that's covered in the mental health and neuroscience course as well. And if you'd like to learn more about our healthy brain aging research, then please feel free to take a photo of the QR code and check out our website. And yeah, I will be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sophie. Thank you for a wonderful masterclass. While you gather your thoughts and take a breath and have a drink of water, there's a bunch of questions we have for you, Sophie, but while you're preparing for those, I might fly through some of the questions that I can address from a technical point of view, I guess. And help me out, Chrissy. But one question was how many modules per course? There are 13 modules per course, and often the 13th module is a summary. Um, there was another question about the assessment style, and Chrissy did mention that. We have a lot of very interesting assessments in our view, what we call research ready. So sometimes we ask students in the programs to write a paper to according to a particular style of journal. It might be instead of writing an essay, it could be a perspective piece in the Medical Journal of Australia, for example, or a paper written according to the guidelines for a journal called Frontiers for Young Minds, which is an open access journal written for young people and reviewed by young people. And we have multimedia presentations and a whole range of things. Um, are you almost ready to answer some questions, Sophie? There's some really interesting ones for you. Actually, I'll have a crack at one of
Yes.
these. There was a question about whether we cover cognitive theories such as predictive processing. Uh, Firstly, we have a whole course dedicated to neurocognition. Most of our content is, of course, neurocognition, for example, and all these other things, interventions, imaging techniques, and so on. Neuroscience, questions that relate to mental health problems. So we do typically look at these things in the context of mental health problems and mental health disorders. In saying that, though, come back to the assessments, we encourage people to use the assessments to actually write about or deliver a presentation on a topic that they like. So it would be easy, I think, to implement and to utilize an assessment and cover cognitive theories, including predictive processing. And I have a feeling also that that could relate very much to one of our modules that covers brain-computer interfaces, which is a very novel and interesting area. And I would assume that algorithms underpinning that would very much rely on cognitive processes and predictive processing in particular. And related to all those things, there was a question about whether we cover functional neurological disorders. Again, we do focus on mental health disorders, the most common mental health or mental disorders or psychiatric disorders such as anxiety, depression, psychosis, dementia. Although dementia, of course, is often considered to be a neurological disorder. And we touch on those things. So we do cover neurology and neurological disorders to some extent. Um, so I've got a question for you, Sophie. You mentioned that high cholesterol was a risk factor for dementia. The question that we had was, what about the relationship between cholesterol lowering medications and dementia? And can one have too low cholesterol levels or lipid levels? Is that a risk factor, I guess, was the subtext of that question.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. That's a really good question. I don't believe that you can have I don't believe that too low cholesterol would be. So we know specifically it's the LDL cholesterol that is the risk factor for dementia. And that has just really been in the last couple of years, that evidence has become very clear. So previously it wasn't listed and now it is, and it accounts for quite a lot of the variance. However, low cholesterol has not been identified as a risk factor, but of course, and indeed, I believe that there's no harm in terms of dementia risk in taking cholesterol lowering medication. But of course, you want to be doing that with guidance of your doctor to optimize the level for you from a side effect perspective as well. But certainly, it would be, from a dementia perspective, it is safer to be on medication and bringing that cholesterol down.
Thanks, Sophie. So another one, this is very interesting. I haven't heard of this, and I am interested if we have an answer because I've, in my own research, I've looked at ADHD quite a lot. So the question is that The person asking the question has quoted that apparently there's a 40% increased risk of dementia if you have a diagnosis of ADHD. I'm not sure about those stats, but have you heard anything along those lines, Sophie? The relationship between an ADHD diagnosis, which is typically younger, in younger ages, and increased chance of dementia.
I haven't heard that, Dan, but there is, I think this just shows how much we're constantly learning about risk factors for dementia. I don't know what the mechanism would be. It might be to do with these protective factors. With an older generation of people, perhaps with ADHD, whether or not they've had the supports through their life, in the way that now younger people are getting more support. So there's a possibility that it could be lifestyle or health related, to do with some of the challenges of living with ADHD when you don't have great supports. However, I haven't read that literature yet, but I'm now interested to look up those latest studies and understand that better.
Okay, thank you. Moving on. So the questions are coming in. Thank you, everyone. And we're happy to go a little bit over time, as I mentioned before. This one, I'm not sure if you can answer this one, Sophie, but any work in your area where they're incorporating using retinal pathology to diagnose AD, Alzheimer's dementia? Do you know anything about
Yeah.
that being incorporated into assessments?
So I have heard that this research is underway in research programs around Australia. We have not currently looked at that at the Thompson Institute, but I believe it's a very promising area of research, because the retina and the eye does change with aging, and there's some really interesting relationships with cognition. So I think that's a really interesting avenue to explore for future research.
I know the answer to this one, but I'll get you to elaborate. The question is to you, Sophie, are you looking at sleep issues as part of the assessment in leisure and the Healthy Brain Aging program?
Yes, absolutely. So sleep was one of the areas that we not only measured sleep issues, but we've also targeted that to support people. We had a sleep psychologist. This was in our dementia risk reduction trial that I mentioned earlier, and we had a sleep psychologist who supported our participants to improve their sleep. The way we measured that was both through self-report, so people would report their sleep in the past 7 days, but we also had people wear an actigraphy watch, so a movement that measured movement around their wrist, and that was able to estimate their sleep time as well, based on that. So we were able to get objective and self-report measures of sleep. It'll be really interesting to look more closely at those results once we have run that data analysis.
On the same topic, the question I have here is sleep apnea bad for dementia?
It is. Yeah, that's a really good question. Sleep apnea is a risk factor for dementia, and it is generally associated with a number of bad outcomes. So sleep apnea itself, even before having dementia, it can cause cognitive impairment. Really, you're depriving the brain of oxygen at regular intervals throughout the night. And we know now that it has effects on fatigue, cognitive impairment, and kind of function throughout the day, even for people who don't have dementia, as well as putting the brain at higher risk, because as we explained, oxygen is very important for the brain. And so you're basically reducing your brain resilience and increasing that risk of dementia. So if anybody has sleep apnea, I know that the treatments are really challenging, but there's some really good reasons to persevere and really try to get that under control.
Any books that you can recommend on advice on how to prevent dementia? What's a good read, Sophie?
Oh, that's a good question. I have to say, I don't have a great answer for this, because I read scientific articles. So perhaps I can look into a good read and maybe share that afterwards.
Okay, great. And I believe you've all been given a link to a form that we have for some questions that we can look into addressing later. I'll try to get through a few more. Where are we? Is there a significant link between dementia and trauma?
Yes, there is. So we know now that people who have a diagnosis of PTSD or significant trauma are at significantly higher risk of dementia. So there is a big intersection between PTSD, aging, and dementia. And again, it's likely because, and this is what you would learn in the course, is that the neurobiological effects that PTSD has, both from the from the trauma itself, but also from some of the lifestyle comorbidities that come along with that in terms of impaired sleep, perhaps higher use of substance use, and other factors can all have impacts on the brain that mean that then there's a higher risk of dementia. But we're still really trying to fully understand those relationships, and that's actually a new avenue that we're going to be exploring here at the Thompson Institute.
Speaking of your work at the Thompson Institute, Sophie, this question is a technical one. How do you address the issue of only 1%, I'm not sure it's that low, of pacemaker patients being able to access brain technologies like MRI in a timely manner?
That's such a good question. And I have to admit, it's an issue because of, well, certainly from a research perspective, some of our technologies from a safety perspective, pacemakers provide a higher risk. And so for research, we don't yet have a way that we can include people with pacemakers and other types of implantable devices safely within our research. So I don't have a good solution for that problem, but I think what we need is better technologies that can actually mean that it's compatible with good treatment intervention options.
You love this question, Sophie, as a clinical neuropsychologist. Is there currently any research into updating current cognitive assessments that are available? I assume in the dementia and healthy brain aging space in particular.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. We are now finally, we had a long period of time, I would say, when I was training probably 15 years ago, where the assessments were quite outdated. I do feel like in the last decade or so, we've come a lot further in updating some of the measures. There's now some good computerized measures that are much more sensitive when it comes to detecting, say, changes in processing speed. They can really get down to the millisecond, and that's much better for measuring kind of more subtle changes over time, as well as having the test materials being more sensitive to some of those executive functioning difficulties, whereas before it was really all about memory. And if people had more subtle early changes of dementia, you wouldn't necessarily pick that up. But we are getting better at incorporating these more sensitive measures into the test batteries.
This is related. What's a good brain training app? There are so many to choose from, is the add-on question or statement to that question.
Yeah, there are. What is often used in clinical trials, and I'm not affiliated with any brands, and I don't use that myself, but Luminosity, I know, has been used within some dementia risk reduction type trials as a cognitive training app. But I would say, so that's one to try, but I can't say that, I can't really comment on any others in terms of their validity. What I would say, though, is that more important than a brain training app is to do something that's cognitively challenging that you enjoy. So if you really enjoy brain training activities, absolutely do it if it's challenging you and you're enjoying it. But if you don't love brain training, then choose something else to do to keep cognitively engaged. It can be something that can be physical, but that needs some learning new skills, like pickleball, I know, is one of the ones that's a favorite at the moment. But it could also be, bridge is really challenging, reading more challenging books, whatever it might be that suits you is something that is going to be the best thing, because you're going to keep going with it, and anything that's challenging the brain is good. And I will add, if it has a social element to it as well, even better, because social connection has emerged as one of the most important factors for healthy aging.
Great questions are coming in. They're streaming in. Is Alzheimer's, this is the next one, is Alzheimer's the primary focus of research, or are there research projects inclusive of other types of dementia like Lewy body? Maybe this is an opportunity to talk about how Alzheimer's gets a lot of attention, but there are a whole range of dementias.
Yeah, absolutely. There are absolutely research programs around Australia that focus on some of the different types of dementia. So, for example, the Sydney Brain and Mind Centre has a whole research focus on frontotemporal dementia. In the Healthy Brain Aging group, we actually focus more on general dementia prevention. So I'm not researching specifically Alzheimer's disease prevention. The reason that I put so much focus on that is because it's the most common form of disease. It's around 70% of people with dementia have Alzheimer's. So that's why often the focus is on there, and there's such confusion between what's the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia. But certainly some of the other, I mean, I spent many years researching Huntington's disease, which is a movement disease which always ends in dementia. So I think it's really important to study all different kinds of dementia, and we need more research in this space. And actually, as you discover more about one type of dementia, it actually can also open the door to understanding other kinds, because a lot of these mechanisms, we're still learning about some of these mechanisms, and sometimes research in one area can inform another area. So I think it's important to research all kinds of dementia.
I really like this next question. There's a lot to it though, so bear with me in reading it. How much of the BDNF increase was seen in the participants in the leisure study measured at the 6-month time point? Was it more than if a control group just went for a jog beforehand? Do you hypothesize that the sample group would maintain higher BDNF levels post-study? And by the way, I like to describe BDNF as the fertilizer for the brain. And you know, it's interesting that this questioner knows about the relationship between BDNF boosting and exercise.
I love that. I love the fertilizer for the brain analogy, Dan. That's such a good question. So the important thing to note is that our intervention was 12 weeks long, but this follow-up was actually measured at 6 months. So we already have shown, actually it was measured 6 months post the end of the intervention. So this is already showing that there's long-term benefit. And in fact, the BDNF increase was actually a little bit higher. So it's almost like it continued on that trajectory. When we are talking about immediate, so this is more looking at long-term BDNF change. In terms of immediate BDNF change you get after a jog, for example, you do get a small potential increase, but then this goes down to baseline. So the idea, I guess, is in this intervention, one of the things that participants were doing was engaging in regular physical activity multiple days a week over a prolonged period. And it seems that perhaps enabled that BDNF level to increase. What we actually saw was a small increase in the intervention group and a small decrease in the control group. And whether that's associated with just the aging process, whether that's natural variability, we're not totally sure. But what it ended up meaning was that there was a significant difference at that 6-month time point in terms of change from the original baseline. So it will be very interesting to continue to pull this apart. But certainly I do believe that this is looking at a sustained change rather than that kind of immediate boost that you get following exercise, which is, I think, very encouraging.
There's so many. I might have to make a call and say this is the last question. I'm assuming it's about healthy brain aging in the context of that. And this is the question: to what extent does the gut biome, I guess gut microbiome, affect neural health? Maybe I'll add to that, Sophie. The gut microbiome's been focused and looked at quite a lot, in a whole range of mental health issues. Anything happening in the dementia and healthy brain aging space in relation to the gut microbiome?
Yeah, absolutely. So there has been some very interesting research in the last decade or so that has found that less variability and spread of the kinds of biota that are found within the microgut biome has been associated with poorer cognitive performance across a range of different types of dementia and populations. So for example, I know that research in my previous role in Huntington's disease showed that that was associated with poorer cognition in the Huntington's disease participants. I know that there's been research in dementia. So I think that this is absolutely a really exciting area for research. I think it ties in really interesting to some of the research that we're doing with diet as well. So for example, we've done research looking at Mediterranean diet and interventions. And I think it'll be interesting to look at how, for example, the Mediterranean diet, which we know is really important for brain health, how much of that is actually at least partially driven by the changes in the gut microbiome, because there's direct connections between the gut and the brain, and as well as good diet also being associated with lower inflammation in the brain and other factors. So I think it's very multifaceted, but the gut microbiome is certainly part of that picture, but this is still really new, really emerging research. So that's another area that we're hoping to investigate more at the Thompson Institute in the coming kind of year or two.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sophie. You can have the rest of the day off. Great answers. We'll leave it there. Thank you all for the questions and for being involved with this webinar and masterclass. It really is great. I'd like to thank my co-presenters. Well, I didn't present much, I just gave the overview, but big thanks to Sophie for a wonderful masterclass. I think you can tell from the range and number of questions how much interest there is in the topic, and so very well presented. And great thanks also to Chrissy. Excellent overview of the programs. And what the students think of it so far. We're 5 years old, the mental health and neuroscience postgraduate programs. I'm not sure if I said it before. This is our 6th webinar and the 7th time we've presented. And a lot of people have worked behind the scenes as well to bring these to life and to do a whole range of things. I'd like to thank some of those people. So Trish Howard's also helping right now in the background. Trish is from the Thompson Institute. And also huge thanks to Phil Van Ziel and Chris Huxley from UniSC Marketing. Thank you for so much support, not only tonight and in the other webinars, but in the last couple of years. I'd like to wrap things up then and say once again, thank you all for being involved. Thank you for your interest. Thank you for your questions. We'll try to follow up other questions later. And please send us an email, get in touch if you have any more questions.